Oh boy, did things escalate quickly or what in this episode? Let's go take a look at what made this episode such a spectacle and why some of it rang a little false. This episode continues the trend of focusing on a couple of stories at a time and leaving the others for a different episode. This one specifically focused on the plight of Arondir, Bronwyn and the Southlands people against Adar and the Orcs, along with the expedition of the Númenóreans and Galadriel. The meat of the episode predominantly deals with the Southlands people trying to deal with the threat of the Orcs. I thought it was going to start off with some ropey BS logic of the Southlands people magically escaping the fort, and Arondir wiping out the enemy with minimal losses in insane fashion, when Arondir triggers the collapse of a tower. I actually don't know how any of that stuff happened. It looks like the rope was holding up some support beams, but like a couple of elements of this episode, it just happens. I'm going to get into that a little bit later on in this review because it's one of the things that brings the overall episode down for me. If this was how they were going to deal with this threat, I was going to be severely annoyed as it felt like a lot of build up for minimal payoff. It was a cool moment and made Arondir look highly resourceful, just at the cost of the villains looking a little idiotic after a really great build up that they had been given in earlier episodes. It does come off as a little ridiculous on how everything literally falls into place, which almost puts it on par with the crazy elements of Jackson's Hobbit series. Thankfully, it wasn't the last of the Orc army and the episode delivered on its promise of action, as Arondir and the Southlands people set a trap for Adar and his army, and we have an entertaining but brutal action sequence. This had been a huge question for me on how they would handle the epicness in longer durations than just the quick flashes and sequences seen previously, and they delivered in stunning fashion. The firelit battle was highly entertaining and looked fantastic. Things looked clear despite being dark, and nothing looked overly choreographed outside of Arondir fighting the big orc. That fight felt a little out of place because it felt more modern in terms of stances but also choreography. It just looked more staged and took me out of it a few times when they tried to make it look like a one-shot. It did get really gruesome like a few things in this episode. They're really pushing the boundary on the PG-13 rating. Honestly, some of this you would expect to see in a House of the Dragon episode, and it feels far more brutal than a lot of the action in Lord of the Rings. We have Arondir nailing the orc in the eye with a stake, then ripping it out. Then the orc is splurting his blood all over Arondir, trying to repay the favour. I appreciate them making a point of what colour orc blood is, as that would have a payoff later on, but it was exceptionally brutal. Entertaining though, but brutal. The brutality doesn't stop there though. Bronwyn is hit with a couple of arrows and they have to remove them and cauterize the wounds, and Adar commands his orcs to kill one human at a time until they hand over the sword hilt they've been searching for. These were not ambiguous quick cuts, they were steady shots where you see the blade slowly enter and leave the victim. Again, I liked it, but it just felt a little brutal than what I'm used to in regards to this universe. With all this action, it quickly starts to fall apart when the earth starts to shake due to the Númenórean cavalry charge. I was thinking, this can't be possible. No bloody way are they coming to save the day, and first I was disappointed. Adar manages to utter a line to the Southland traitor.
Lotr, I have a task for you.
And this sets in motion the climax of the episode. Now, the action from the cavalry charge was good. We got to see Galadriel do a cool trick, then repeat it. She gives chase as Adar flees, and somehow Halbrand manages to cut him off. Was Adar just riding around in a ring? This is one of those things where I roll my eyes, where directors or writers just throw logic out the window and just make things happen because they need to happen. I'm going to get into some of the logistics of how these things happen and why it's so maddening. When Arondir takes out the orc army at the watchtower, we know the orcs have all lined up to move on in, but there's only one way in and out of the castle, so luckily for Arondir, he seems to have no issue on the bridge, where realistically the rest of the orc army should be standing ready for him, but they're all further down the hill. In the aerial shot, it looks like there's a few on the bridge, but we're never shown a resolution to this, we just know he escapes. I didn't quite understand how the Southlands people would have been able to get past this orc army and back to the village. The watchtower's position seemed like a pretty well fortified position with only one way in and out, and there's one too many of them to properly sneak past the approaching orcs. If this was a one-off in the episode, I probably wouldn't be as troubled by it all, but the way the Númenóreans showed up at the end really bothered me. They say early on it will be another day's sailing to reach the mountains, but another day's ride across the mountains. What made Mordor such an ideal location for Sauron was the natural defences that the mountains provided. It's why it funneled people either to the Black Gates or to take a crack at the pass of Cirith, which isn't what I'd describe as the most horse-friendly. But for some reason, unbeknownst to me, these Númenóreans are riding with real haste. I don't know what for exactly. Did someone get a warning message out to them? You see in the wide shot a river behind them, but I'm not sure if that's just New Zealand and it looked cool so they left it in, because like a nerd I had to go look at a map of Middle Earth to figure out what river they were bloody going up to reach the mountains, and the map I had differs from the show slightly. They seem to have added another river for convenience. I know the Southlands is about to go into a real geological change, but still, it felt like there was a few things left out. And this sailing and arriving at the Southlands should have happened an episode prior. In an ideal world, this episode should have had the Númenóreans scouting the land or realise a town is being attacked by an orc army. Just get Galadriel in range because we've been shown and told multiple times that the elves have otherworldly vision. That also would have solved the problem of feeling like we had much more movement in regards to this plotline. Back in episode 4, we had the Fallen Leaves and what seemed like an agreement for the Númenóreans to sail to Middle-earth to assist Galadriel in freeing the Southlands. Then we had what felt like a waste of a precious episode with unneeded drama preparing to sail a ship until finally leaving Númenor at the end of episode 5. As it stands, this episode had them travelling in lightning fast fashion compared to movement of characters in prior episodes, going from the sea to suddenly being on land riding at full speed. For what reason exactly? Finally, on this subject, that damned hill. You're telling me none of our protagonists was curious to see what was so damned important about this object that they decided to leave the thing wrapped up? Galadriel, who's been looking for Sauron, finally has the secret weapon in hand and doesn't look at it? Arondir holds it and gives it to Theo, who's the only one who looks at it and reveals to the audience, dun dun dun, it's not the hill. It just makes our protagonists look stupid. That's what made the One Ring so powerful in Peter Jackson's films. It had this presence to it, and when Gandalf touched it they had the flash of the eye of Sauron. And that's why they always tried to keep it under wraps from him. It might have been too soon in this episode, but just have Galadriel unwrap the thing and realise it's not a weapon, or have it be a different object so that we the audience know something's wrong, but she may not. Then continue the episode. And if she was supposed to know what it looked like, maybe she's trying to interrogate Adar about a weapon and where it is and what it does. Cut to the Southlands guy inserting the blade. This goes back to the principle of writers and directors just doing shit that doesn't make sense in favour of spectacle, and it really sours me on an otherwise fantastic bit of television, so let's get to what I do enjoy. Adar is such a great invention of the show. I think he makes a far more three-dimensional villain than what we've seen portrayed thus far, including the films. He's not here to outright kill people, his orcs are not just nameless creatures, they are his children and he's named each one and they refer to him as father. When they are in pain and suffering, he puts them out of their misery. He wants a home for him and his children, and that's something really interesting to hear. Not world domination, just somewhere to reside. When he has his discussion with Galadriel, she's the one who sounds like a supervillain, and I'm glad they addressed that.
I will whisper in your piked ear that all your offspring are dead.
It would seem I'm not the only elf alive who's being transformed by darkness.
She's driven by such hatred for anything related to Morgoth that she lacks something important: forgiveness. I was reading on Reddit a few months back and something really stuck with me about Tolkien. It was about the orcs and if they could ever be good, or if they were pure evil. And Tolkien in one of his letters says that irredeemably bad would be going too far, and that anything created was done so by God and wouldn't be naturally evil. Evil only happened as a consequence of things, so to speak. These scenes with Adar just reminded me of that, and it's almost like a flip of Bilbo helping the dwarfs reclaim their home. Adar is just trying to make a home for his children. I enjoyed the reveal of the Southlanders who died fighting for the orc army. The use of blood to distinguish them was a great touch and made the excessive blood moments of the big orc before a lot more understandable. And the music for the orc army was awesome, alongside the cinematography and fantastic visual effects. Without question, this is the best looking show on TV, and it's not even close in my opinion. However, their shooting this thing just looks a step above everything else, and that includes House of the Dragon. The film language in this show is very reminiscent of Jackson's films. A lot of this felt derivative of that, the men preparing for Helm's Deep or riding to Gondor, the slow motion shots. Maybe I'm looking into this too much and it's just normal film language to utilize, but the Lord of the Rings films are so embedded in my core that I'll instantly connect anything similar from these shows to those films as a comparison. It's hard not to. I just wish some of the storytelling aspects and pacing was as on point as the rest of the production. For the most part, it's good and even great, but there's always these small cracks that form. Galadriel started off fantastic in episode 1 and 2, then went off the deep end in episode 3 as she goes rather crazy in front of the Númenóreans rather than being reasonable about anything. I could understand why they wouldn't want dealings with the elves if that's how they acted. Then she returned to being great fun again. However, I'm absolutely terrified that they might be making Halbrand Sauron. That would kind of suck for me, especially if they keep trying to make this romance with Galadriel and Halbrand a thing.
I felt it too.
They need to do more of what they've done with Adar and the orcs. The whole digging made so much more sense. At first I thought it was a system for the orcs to be able to move more freely rather than hindered by the sun. But when the water was rushing through the system, it made my mind click and I was like, that's awesome. I was wondering when Mordor would start looking like Mordor, and I'd love to see how fans unfamiliar with the maps and not knowing where the Southlands were would react to Mount Doom exploding for the first time. What a visual that was, along with the chaos it caused. Although, is that all that sword did was act as a key to unblock the dam? Could they not have just made a catapult and pelt that thing? I'm probably nitpicking there. However, I'm a bit skeptical how they're going to explain Galadriel surviving this oncoming storm of fire and ash heading her way as everything else seems to be catching fire as soon as it hits. Thankfully, it looks like Adar escaped, so more of him please. I also enjoyed Galadriel's conversation with Isildur approaching Middle-earth. These are small nice character moments and the wonder that Isildur expressed was nice. Oh, and have we seen Theo's ears by the way? I swear they're hiding them on purpose at this rate and they'll reveal he's Arondir's son, which kinda doesn't make sense. I hope he's not. But making the idea of men and elves becoming lovers a far too common of a thing for my liking, and it takes away the uniqueness of Arwen and Aragorn and some of these stories earlier on. Hopefully we get back to some of the more consistently stronger storylines in my opinion next week, and those are with Elrond and Durin, which make a captivating pair and really capture the spirit of Tolkien along with the travelling Harfoots. Although this is going to feel agonising if they ignore the plight of Galadriel and co next week. And despite me pulling apart some of the writing elements, I am looking forward to the next episode and a continuation of this plotline. I think this will be a huge moment for the show. It's just a shame some of it was let down by some poor writing and directing. It's not the masterpiece that IGN claims it to be, but it's certainly a spectacle.